And we're already getting started, ladies and gentlemen. We're getting on the warm-up phase for the very first map, which is Halfpipe by Kisla. This map was played, remember, from step 1 through 3, and this is a map that we that saw some pretty epic comebacks and some pretty epic battles right from the outset, with the battle especially between Scrappy and Spam that was decided towards the final towards the end of the final lap, with Spam winning by less than 0.02 of a second or something like that, which was pretty amazing.
Yeah, I actually joined the wrong server here, I think. Now I'm in the correct one, so I did miss the first part of the warm-up here, but yeah, very, very close battles on this map, especially as you said in step 1, where Spam won. So now with just 2 players, with just Carl and Gwen, very interesting. I think it's, as you said, a toss-up, though the one who picked this map was Gwen himself, so he does favor it over the alternatives. But now we're seeing actually Carl being the only one driving the warm-up, and Gwen taking the time to get in the right mindset.
Getting in the right mindset, maybe stretching a little bit after all of the time set up, sitting in a chair, sitting in the chair, maybe a little bit hunched over with the hands gripping the gamepad and whatnot. So maybe a little bit of time to stretch, to poster check and whatnot. But we're getting started with the grand final, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go, map 1 underway.
Yeah, this is the grand finals of Trackmania Grand League. Get some hype in the chat. It is a 1 versus 1 format. They will play 3 rounds on each map, and the first player to win 3 maps overall is your champion. This map, Halfpipe, is picked by Gwen, and we're already underway on the first round here. We see CarlJr coming up to an early lead, getting 0.10 of a second over him. And now we're onto the dirt here, the transitional section, where it's important to land as early and as smoothly as possible to build up the speed over this entire straight, where you will need it for the next jump. Gwen here closing the gap a little bit that Carl had, and overtakes first with a good entry into that dirt. So well done by the young Frenchman, and he is going to have about a 0.20 lead going into the 0.30 even going into the first dirt jump here. Both players getting the sufficient speed and will avoid that unfortunate landing. Now it's anyone's game. As
Carl.
Identity soon. CarlJr hitting the wall. Will he even make this jump? Will barely, but he is 1.5 seconds behind. It should be at the next checkpoint here. So CarlJr now very far behind Gwen, already in the first lap.
Yeah, far behind. He's gonna have to pull a miracle identity feast to try and catch back up to Gwen, at least in this first lap. Remember, there's another lap after this one coming up, but it doesn't seem like he has any answer in the identity even to the pace of Gwen, as Gwen extends the gap to 0.9 of a second, heading into the final lap with a 1:26.371, an opening reference for Gwen right now. Heading into the first checkpoint, the gap still widens ever so slightly. We're gonna soon get past the second mark. Now, if it was F1, that would mean that we would be seeing CarlJr getting out of the DRS zone. But even though there's no DRS, he's gonna get out of that second buffer as he completely messes up the drift and lets Gwen get a buffer of 1.6 seconds at the end of the dirt jump. And it seems like it might be settled in, but remember, chat, your cars are saying that it's over, but you never know what happens. Maybe there could be an unfortunate shenanigan happening for Gwen. You never know. I mean, Castor's been hitting pretty hard. He can still hit again, remember. First dip.
Yeah, CarlJr here, it looks like his lap has been falling apart, but all it takes here is one half-pipe jump where Gwen is just slightly off the line he wanted to drive, and that would be the point going down the drain. Gwen here, though, driving rather safe for his pace. It doesn't look safe, but this is Gwen on full safe and secure mode here. He knows he has the lead. He's losing time to Carl, but as long as he is ahead at the finish line, that's all that matters to get this point. The identity looked more sketchy than I would have liked to see if I were Gwen, but he does secure that point. 1-0 Gwen.
Oh my god! Yeah, that landing out of the second jump was, oh my goodness.
Too close for comfort, but Gwen will get that finalist mode. Now CarlJr has to win twice in a row if he wants to win the map halfpipe. If not, we're going on to the second one. We're going on to Semiramis, and maybe Carl can make a stand on the map that he chose. This one, chosen by Gwen. He has the lead. He could close it out here in a quick 2-0 and get the first map point of the series. So go on to the second lap.
So currently CarlJr leading into the platform turn just before the dirt, but having a bit of a worse line compared to Gwen, which will allow Gwen to catch back up to within his clutches at the very least, as we're going to be heading into the second platform part right now. Carl still retaining the lead and widening the gap to a tenth of a second compared to Gwen in P2. Now the jump, it's important not to get a little bit too eager and try to go for a bit of a really inside line, because otherwise you're not going to get enough airtime to and enough height to clear that jump. Now heading into the double dip jump right now. Let's actually see the speed for Gwen. 221. That's a bit scary. Will he be able to clear it? Yes, and no speed loss at the landing. So currently it's still looking like an even fight in favor of CarlJr at the present moment. The Canadian leading by a tenth and a half.
Oh, Gwen messing up the gear, almost flying out of the track there. He tried to do a trick called the no slide, where you gently steer the controller and avoid the car sliding out. Had to adapt there in just half a second.
Oh, God.
No, Gwen. He's not going to make the following jump. That is going to be a 5-second mistake. And as soon as CarlJr sees this on the following checkpoint, he will know that this time the table has been turned, the roles are flipped, and it is him now who can try to save it as best as possible through the second lap of halfpipe.
Yeah, it might be a little bit of a flick of the HUD on and off to actually watch the gap and see, and it's widened to not tenths of a second, but seconds now compared to Gwen, and he can potentially afford to save it. Plan to attack. Who knows? Maybe he's completely, maybe he's going to try to push that. But it's with that line through the dirt, maybe he did not manage to get that a little bit. Maybe he didn't manage to get that optimal line through there. So currently, Carl looking to secure that point on the board, but it ain't over till it's over. We're gonna have to, he's gonna have to wait until the fat lady sings and he crosses that start-finish line as we're heading into the double dip jump again, going a bit wider to get as much speed as he can. He gets 225 at the first jump, so, well, more than enough to clear the first dip and second dip as well. And Gwen has made another mistake, but apparently that could seal the fate right now. So, yeah, 11.9 seconds for Gwen in terms of a gap compared to CarlJr in P1, and still CarlJr will be heading into the identity right now with a pretty safe cushion right now, and we're going to be onto an equalizer already on map 1, and we're going to be heading into map points already.
Yeah, so CarlJr here could even afford to respawn now and still win. He will close it out in style, getting everything clean, and putting us to a tie score. There's one round left to be played here in halfpipe, and the winner will get the first point. Let's see what happens. Both players have had their one mistake they can afford in this match. Now they can't afford one more, or else the other player will win. So we're going on to the final round of halfpipe. Already in the start here, we saw CarlJr twice getting it a little bit better than Gwen. If Gwen can follow that pace now and take the lead here, that would be a huge start for him if he can keep up. But you see Carl there, that one turn, he has mastered it just a little bit better than Gwen over the following weeks of practice, and it's going to have the lead again into the dirt. We've seen Gwen usually getting more speed on the exit here to catch back up, but now CarlJr extending, so CarlJr onto something here in the beginning as we go towards the dirt. Yeah,
and you were talking about that bump road corner. CarlJr managing to hug the apex of the corner a little bit more, and maybe getting a little on the throttle a little bit earlier compared to Gwen, who was forced to go for a bit of a wider line at the exit, which in the end favored the Canadian. Both are clearing the double dip jump, but Gwen has had quite a big drop in speed at the landing, so he will be finding himself down 7 tenths down on the leader as CarlJr is now sailing away towards the identity towards the end of lap number 1. Let's actually check in on the Canadian's perspective right now for that identity right now. First jump, nicely done. He keeps it at a somewhat midway point. He doesn't go too high, it seems like, even though he's affording to safe it. But Carl touches on the inside, and he touches the wall of halfpipe. But Gwen as well, he touches it. But the respawn is so costly for Carl. Holy crap, let's actually look at the gap as he crosses the front finish line. 10 seconds!
Yeah, he's had to have respawned twice. Already failing late was bad, but I think he failed again after the respawn. And if he had known that Gwen would fail, he would be kicking himself right now. But of course, the gap is 7 seconds now, with the difference from Gwen having low speed. Still though, Gwen again given a golden round here, a golden ticket, could secure the first map point. But one thing you pointed out in the last round, GGeek, is that some players will choose to turn off the interface of the game. They'll choose to turn off everything, so they can only see their car driving and nothing about their timer, about their opponent's splits, about their opponent's car. and just drive in their own headspace and try to focus. And if Gwen is doing that right now, and he does not know that CarlJr has made this big mistake, then maybe he will make a mistake he otherwise wouldn't have with the information. So it is a sort of the downside to playing with the interface off, if that is what he's doing here, but it looks like he has it under control. He is aware of the situation, and if he can get across his identity now, he will win half pipe. So let's see it here. First jump out, bit more risky than I like to see, but Gwen is making it work. One more to go here, and it is going to be a 1-0 for Gwen and for GameWard in the finals of the Mini Grand League.
And so Gwen will get himself the very first map on the board and draw first blood compared to CarlJr after that mistake from the Canadian at the identity, who looked to have this in control at the start of the final round. So yeah, definitely not the start that the reigning champion would have wanted, as we're moving on to his map pick. As a matter of fact, Semiramis by Table and Firestorm.
Yeah, and CarlJr here, actually, if I'm not mistaken, is the world record holder on the track. Maybe we can get a check on that. I know Gwen has a very fast time as well. These are undoubtedly two of the fastest players, but actually who holds the world record here would be nice to know coming into this one, as I think their pace is going to be rather close to that record.
Yeah, indeed. And yeah, so Gwen having the advantage of winning his map pick. Now it's going to be up to CarlJr to move on to his map pick at the present moment. So we're going to have to see how this goes for the Canadian, as he goes off to the edge of the platform, deciding not to continue his lap any further, and potentially having retired. No, not quite. He's actually just
I think he just wanted to drive alone again. The CarlJr Classic, jumping off the map to get some space. At the end of the warm-up, we are going live on Semiramis. This is the second map of the final, picked by CarlJr. Let's have a look at the start here, where we usually see these small differences. Now it's a big difference. CarlJr going straight into the first turn and giving Gwen 1.5 seconds of a lead straight off the bat there. That is not what you want to see from CarlJr now. But now, really, he has to just forget that ever happened and try to focus. Although it can be difficult, because that is a mistake that at this level you really don't see that often.
Yeah, I was like, is this real life? What we just saw just before the first checkpoint as well, to add salt to injury. Holy crap. Meanwhile, Gwen is currently sailing away in front with a 1.3 second gap to Carl in P2, as we're heading into the identity right now. In the space of a few seconds right now for CarlJr. Gwen going through the first jump right now, going for a bit of a safer approach, maybe getting a bit of a hang time, going for a bit of a further reach into the platform to secure that landing, and he will lead the first lap of the race, moving into lap 2 in the lead with the 1:11.171 as the opening lap, and Carl is 1.5 seconds behind.
Yeah, and that was the difference after that first corner hit. So CarlJr has not driven any slower than Gwen following that. So if it hadn't been for that one mistake, they would have been right at each other's wheels right now. But Carl, still 1.4 seconds to gain, probably has to hope for a mistake, a dent in the armor of Gwen, who's been driving consistently so far. This turn is one of the most difficult. Gwen being late, but releases appropriately to save his line, to get through the turn. And CarlJr follows, but he has capitalized, gaining a bit of time back. 1.1 now, it was 1.4, so CarlJr making a bit of work, but it's still a long way to go, and Gwen will be the favorite here towards the identity now. On the second lap, if he can get these 3 jumps, he is going to move up to a 1-0 and a finalist mode. First jump, all in the bag. Second one coming through, looking very risky, but I'm sure Gwen has this one under control.
And Carl makes mistakes as well.
Yeah, will make it on through.
Yeah, Gwen winning the race once again, and Carl crashing not once, not twice, but 3 times apparently in the identity, allowing Gwen to move on to map point already, get that second map on the, and potentially allowing him to make that second map and put it on the board to move through to Grand League point, essentially, with the next map coming up potentially. But now it's going to be potentially it's going to have to be the wake-up call for Carl to get back to his steering wheel or gamepad, whatever, and try to perform right now. He can't afford to let anything slip from his fingers.
Yeah, and I gotta imagine that if Gwen has a 2-0 going towards circles as the third map, he could actually clean sweep the finals here. Carl really needs to win this map, as Circles is one of Gwen's best maps in the map pack. But Gwen now, he is looking for that win, that early closure here. If he can get the 2-0 on this map and in the series as a whole, that could be a victory in reach for him. CarlJr, though, closing that gap that Gwen was accruing down to just a few hundreds towards the identity. First jump out, we see the different lines. CarlJr going for a wider approach on all the jumps, lower airtime as well, but the speed coming out of the third one is the most important factor. And guess what? They are dead even onto the second lap.
Not exactly dead even, as Gwen went for a much more inside line at the final grass corner and moves through to the lead with a gap of a 10th over CarlJr, heading into the dirt right now. Let's actually see if there are any unfortunate landings. Nope, both have had the same sort of speed coming out of that landing, because we saw CarlJr having a pretty having a pretty unfortunate landing in the final four as well. So it definitely is important that this kind of shenanigan does not happen for either of those players, as they are now neck and neck heading into the second half of the map. CarlJr barely avoiding disaster, keeping it out of the wall. And currently Gwen
now pushing so hard for the win. That was a beautiful sequence of turns, trying to close it out now. He has this one round where he can at least fail and not be too worried about it, as he won the first one, but they are dead even on the identity. Carl overtaking Gwen now has to push to try to close out the win here in the final jumps. It is going to be decided here who gets the most speed. Gwen will have the inside line, but is it too inside? Can CarlJr capitalize with more speed?
Oh my god, Carl with the comeback!
Gwen went too inside, and CarlJr equalized it. It's a 1-1 on Semiramis.
And that unfortunate lack of speed resulting from that really aggressive jump onto the grass from Gwen yields a pretty weird bump, meaning that he rolls over into the finish, and we're again heading up to an equalizer and another map point decided on the final round on Semiramis right now, with Gwen and Carl having really different priorities. Gwen trying to move on to a Grand League point, and Carl trying to even the scales in this grand final.
Yeah, and that is just how close it was to. Like, that one turn could maybe decide the match, the momentum. If Gwen goes up to a 2-0 there, it could be very hard for Carl's mental to come back. So Carl there being able to secure that, it has got to feel good, but now he has to win this round 2, or else that effort will be all for nothing, as the result will be the same. Gwen having that first map now is feeling really comfortable in this match, and also leading this race by 0.4. He's got to feel great about a situation. We're going towards the identity here, where we saw very unique lines coming out last round. Here we see more traditional approaches. Gwen going for something like we've seen from Papu.
And now Gwen fails.
Going way too low on the last jump. And CarlJr will perhaps win Semiramis now, as that is a 4-second mistake from Gwen in the first lap.
Yeah, CarlJr might just be handed down on the silver plate, but remember, anything can happen in Trackmania, and usually does. And also, the caster's curse has been hitting quite severely tonight, and so we might not be safe from seeing CarlJr having a blunder at the identity as well that could allow Gwen past again and move through again to 2 maps to 0 compared to the triple world champion and Grand League champion right now. So we're going to see how this goes right now from the perspective of the Canadian, moving through the jump quite nicely here, having a gap of 5 seconds to play with over Gwen in second position right now, moving on to the final part of the map with the bump road transition coming up. Head over to the right hand side, then over to the left hand side, tilting your car a little bit to land nicely onto the little bit of platform banking. Now onto the identity for CarlJr. First jump coming up right now. Here we go. Gets a bit of a lower line compared to last time around through there. Second jump nicely done as well. Will he get too low of a jump? Nope, he manages to get through perfectly, and so Carl will be able to win Semiramis and put this series on 1-1 in this grand final of the Grand League.
Yeah, very, very needed now, because it is going to be an uphill battle for Carl, I think. Going on to Circles, one of Gwen's favorite maps. He has won there in the Grand League 6 laps. Now in a 2-lap format, he is still going to be a very dangerous threat, and CarlJr not being at the brink of losing Grand League here, being at a 1-1 score instead of a 2-0 is absolutely vital. But who knows here, maybe CarlJr can turn it around and put Gwen under pressure if he wins Circles.
Yeah, circles coming up, and actually, let's actually get a bit of a check on the timing sheets. CarlJr does have the pace advantage over Gwen, albeit only about a tenth of a second between these two on the two lappers. 2:30.840 for CarlJr in first place, and Gwen in third in the timing sheets with a 2:30.952. So it could still be a game of margins if both players manage to get their act together and not falter at any point during the two lappers.
Yeah, so that is 2 laps. So across each lap, we're talking 0.05 of a second difference between these two players' best pace. That is how close it is. 0.05 of a second. And that could be how close this match and this map is. We're going to find out here. First round of circles. The warm-up is already completed, and both players are onto the run now. In the third map, we see Gwen coming away with an early lead. CarlJr losing about 0.10, which is a lot on circles, but the most important part of the map is right here. Building up speed across the ice will net you a speed advantage over this entire following straight. So let's see now who has the best speed. It is CarlJr, I think, by just a hair, and that could be meaning that both are equal as we're coming towards the next section. Though Gwen actually holding this lead into the wall right they go now. And Gwen has a 10th of the lead, so it is going to come down to the identity section of the map. Gwen here, more speed over the grass. That is going to extend. I think that is about a 0.2 lead for the Frenchman. But now we're coming towards the identity on the first lap. Let's see if Gwen can hold it here. They're going to jump onto the first circle, drift to the left, go onto the quarter pipe as low as possible, through that little gap in the checkpoint, get the booster, and then drop down on to the third circle here. CarlJr opting for more speed than Gwen with that high line, and you can see it paying off here. Will be dead even onto the second lap here, and this is the type of match that we wanted to see between the Gwen, the new player trying to be the champion, trying to defeat CarlJr, who is the most infamous Trackmania player in the scene. They are neck and neck into the second lap here of circles.
This was quite the first lap, almost within the same 100th of a second, almost within the same 1,000th of a second even at the start of lap number 2. Currently, Gwen holding the lead. Let's actually see if CarlJr is able to get a little bit of more speed. Not quite as he was able to do in the first lap, though, so Gwen still holds the lead around 2/10 compared to the Canadian right now. Moving on to the wall ride, where we saw both players going for the ice patch right now, whereas in the Grand League overall season, Tween actually went below the sign and avoided the ice patch completely to retain full grip, which is a bit of a interesting strategy, to say the least. Meanwhile, heading onto the grass, the gap is still staying around stable, around 0.2 of a second in favor of Gwen, heading into the identity right now, coming into the first jump right now. Transfer jump nicely. Oh, a bit of a touch from Gwen that will allow CarlJr to seep through into first place. Will that enable the Canadian to move through into the lead and go into the map win, or will Gwen get more speed? It doesn't seem like Gwen has any answer to that, and Carl will win the map and put himself in finalist mode for circles.
And it is so close here, 0.08 of a second. Very, very, very small margin between the two. That was just that tiny corner clip from Gwen that decided that round. But what a match we have on our hands here, ladies and gentlemen. This is the highest level of Trackmania I think we've ever seen between these two players. Apart from the mistakes we've seen, when these two players drive without mistakes, it is a joy to watch how perfect lines they are performing under such a pressure situation. So let's take a moment to appreciate that. This is Trackmania at its finest here. Gwen versus CarlJr, El Clasico, the match we've all wanted to see. It's finally here, and we're on to the second round of circles here. Let's see if Gwen can hold his own, or if CarlJr is going to get the first 2-0 of the series.
Gwen managing to get a tiny bit more speed than CarlJr, similar, but really marginal gains comparable to what CarlJr had against Gwen in the first lap. Right now, we're heading onto the wall ride with the ice patch. CarlJr still retaining the lead. A bit of drift at the outside of the wall ride, allowing potentially Gwen to catch back up the teensy tiny bit, even though it's not really mattering that much. A 10th of a second in favor of CarlJr right now, heading into the identity with the first jump coming up into the very first circle. So, jump coming up right now, then the first transfer jump. Will there be any touches on the transfer jump? No, both are clean passes. Now onto the second transfer from the second circle to the third circle. Gwen going for the higher line, trying to get as much speed as he can on the landing to try and counteract CarlJr, but CarlJr's got much more speed than Gwen at the exit of that second of that transfer, and so he will move through the 2/10 lead coming into the final lap with a 1:19.602 at the first checkpoint.
And this is actually the biggest lead we've seen all match here on circles. 0.2 might not sound like a lot, but on circles, it is very hard to catch up though. Gwen here actually being able to do it against CarlJr, the 3-time world champion. Really challenging here, going so close on the corner, making it through here. Gwen knowing he has to push it all now. And who is going to get the speed advantage here? CarlJr going down from the ice. Gwen going up, and CarlJr, yeah, just a little bit more speed there, but it is actually just about even here, and they are within 100th here as we're going across the full speed section into the wall right now. Gwen overtaking Carl after having a bit better slides on the grass there. Gwen going a bit higher up on the platform for this drift, which nets him more speed, so Gwen extending that lead up to about 500s, but look how close it is. It's been this close the entire match. Now who's going to get it in the identity? We know CarlJr likes to go for that line. That gives him more speed. Gwen going for the inside line. Which one is going to pay off here? When it matters the most, Gwen just a bit ahead, but CarlJr usually gets a bit more speed with this. Who is it going to be here? Gwen has the lead. Carl has the speed.
Oh my God.
Who is it going to be? It's going to be so close for the finish.
Carl!
It's dead even. CarlJr with the 2-0, 100th of a second. And this is Trackmania at its finest.
Carl, coming back from a 1-0 deficit, now moves to Grand League point and within the chance of actually retaliating and keeping his title for one more season. We're moving on to map number 4, which is CarlJr's map pick right now, which is Starglide by Link.
Yeah, CarlJr winning out on Gwen's map pick and going on to his own here of Starglide. And CarlJr has quite the history of this map. He's won it in 2 of the 3 regular season steps, and he's also had the 2-lap world record here. So CarlJr, certainly one of the favorites.
Oh, we're getting straight away into it.
Entire tournament now.
We're getting straight away into it, ladies and gentlemen. Warm-up has been skipped. We're heading into potentially what could be the final map of the series for Carl, and now potentially the last stand of actually getting ourselves into potentially an equalizer, but Gwen has to perform right now. He knows that this is CarlJr's favorite map with the 2 wins out of 3 you stated a little bit earlier with Wirtual in the regular season. Now Gwen is going to seek to actually get himself a little bit ahead and try to move through into the lead and try to deny CarlJr from securing that series just yet.
Yeah, Gwen now, great early lead here, 0.2 of a second. But we know the identity on Starglide is the most decisive part. The players will fly with the reactor booster and try to build up speed down a staircase that's coming up right now. But Gwen, what a lead this is. It's the biggest lead of the match, apart from the mistakes on the first map. Half a second here in raw driving pace for Gwen. But can he hold it in the identity section here on Starglide? The first staircase is down. Both players will get it. Second one here. Both players getting this one well, and the third one, the most important one, to build up speed for the entire last part of the lap here, will be in favor of Gwen, I think, extending a little bit up to about 0.45, 0.46. It is marginal, but it is what is needed to hold that lead against Carl for the second lap here and to hold his own hopes alive in the tournament.
Yeah, barely keeping his hopes alive. I thought he clipped on the outside just a little bit, the edge of the road. That little teetering action of the car kind of gave me a few heart flutters, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, Gwen currently leading that race convincingly, half a second in front of CarlJr in P2 right now, as we're heading towards the exit of the dirt part for both players. Gwen currently still holding the lead nicely and securely, although Carl is trying to work that gap back in and try to catch back up to Gwen in first place right now. Moving both through the jump right now, heading into the grass part with the identity coming up in the best part of 10 seconds for both of these drivers. Who will keep the most speed at the free roll part? Let's actually wait and see how this goes from the perspective of Gwen right now. Gwen getting around 127, 126, and CarlJr 131. A little marginally better speed for CarlJr heading into the identity right now. First gliding action done, and Gwen having a bit of an advantage. After that second gliding, right now Carl not able to make anything, to make any gains right now, and he might not be able to catch Gwen back up enough to warrant a fight and a snipe at the line, and Gwen will be moving to the final status and try to make the series 2-2. Next round coming.
Gwen getting the first one here on Starglide, very important now, as it is do or die. Carl has serious point if he wins this map, so Gwen now stepping up when it matters the most, gets finalist, but he has to do it one more time. And CarlJr's pace there, or the pace in the round overall, was so fast that keeping up with that for a second time is going to be very, very difficult. Though already in the start here, you can see that he hits that road again, and I believe it's actually an intentional strat here from Gwen to reduce airtime, to clip that road corner just a little bit. but doing it at 300 speed in the finals of a tournament takes some otherworldly precision that only Gwen can do here. And that will actually give him the lead in this round. That combined with perfect driving here almost. Look how close these players are going to every wall, how much speed they're able to push out of every turn. It is a joy to watch when it's executed at this level, and they are so close to each other in terms of skill. Coming across the grass here, dead even though Gwen has an inside line and will have the lead across the freewheeling, across these tight turns. It is going to be Gwen favored towards the identity. 0.10, 0.15 towards the first jump now. Gets the boost into the checkpoint, 0.20 even. So has gotten himself a bit of a lead like we saw first time. CarlJr, awkward identity line, extends that lead to 0.6 now for Gwen, and if he gets good speed here...
Oh no!
Oh, he actually has lower speed. It is going to be equal just about towards the second lap, and we have such a race on our hands here as CarlJr is going to catch up with Gwen, and we are neck and neck on the second lap.
Second lap, they're within the 700s of each other right now, and Gwen with a really paltry exit out of the final part of the identity has got quite the fight on his hands right now. And again, that's clip, however intentional it might be, it must, I'm on the edge of a heart attack watching Gwen perform this consistently right now. Meanwhile, CarlJr tries to get the gap back, to reel Gwen back in, to get the gap back down to under 2/10 and even a tenth right now, as he tries to pressure the Frenchman to making a mistake. But so far, the Frenchman has soaked up the pressure really well heading into this grand final, as we're heading towards the identity in the best part of 10 to 15 seconds with both of these guys right now. Gwen heading Carl by a quarter of a second right now. Moving to the freewheel part just after the grass. Let's actually see who gets as much speed, gets better speed right here. Gwen gets 126 and Carl has got around 130s. So yeah, it is going to be really good potentially for CarlJr to try and reel the gap back in. Gwen has a slow exit out of the first glider, so CarlJr will move through into the lead, but Carl has a slow exit as well from the second glider, so Gwen moves back up into the lead. Now the third one is going to be so important. Carl with the early landing, it's going to cost all speed, and Gwen will equalize the series and move the series to the decider map, 2-2 in this grand final.
And this is what I think everyone was hoping to see. 5 maps between CarlJr and Gwen in a 1v1 setting. They're both going toe-to-toe here, each taking a map from each other, and we're at 2-2, we're at equal score, and the one who wins 2 of the 3 next rounds will be your Trackmania Grand League champion. It's all coming down to Paradise to decide it all.
Paradise. Quick check of the leaderboard. CarlJr, 249.174. Gwen P5 in the leaderboard, 250.888. So theoretically a pace advantage of 1.1 seconds to CarlJr over the course of 2 laps. But nothing is ever certain in Trackmania, so take that for what you will and look forward to this final lap.
Yeah, CarlJr with the world record here, 1 second better PB than Gwen, but it could also be a matter of Gwen here not willing to show his true pace, practicing the map without driving it so that others can see his score. We don't really know here what Gwen has, but he has been able to step up on this map in rounds prior. And now let's see if he can do it when it matters the most. Ladies and gentlemen, the final map of the series, of the tournament, of Trackmania Grand League 2020. Gwen versus CarlJr on Paradise, and we're on to the first lap here. Coming up the dirt now. They are even yet to the shortcut jump. So there is this one decisive part here where the players will steer sharply to the left, jump through a window here, and try to land at the checkpoint and set themselves up for the next drop down. That passes with ease, both players getting it super effortlessly. Now onto the dirt corner here. This one, it's important to build up a lot of speed on the exit and not clip the corner. Gwen even opting for a small dirt wiggle there. That will net him a little bit more speed, but it is marginal, and he has only built up about 0.10, where we know that the identity section on this map can sometimes gain several seconds if it's executed well, and that's where we are headed right now.
Yeah, exactly, with Gwen currently leading by 0.2 of a second before the technical part. This is also where Gwen's made some substantial gains compared to some of his peers earlier on in the night. Let's actually see if CarlJr is able to retaliate to that. Not quite. Gwen managing to keep that gap at around a quarter of a second and potentially extending it a tiny bit to around 0.3. Let's actually see at the checkpoint, 32 hundredths of a second heading into the identity. Carl and Gwen going for the exact same strat of going high and diving and ducking low at the last second. And Gwen currently retains the advantage after the first drop down. Second drop down, CarlJr touching on the outside, and CarlJr will be in a really rough spot, 1.1 second down on the leader. Gwen will be running away with this one right now with the final lap coming up, and CarlJr now has a 2.1 second of a lateness, I should say. Oh, I don't know, a gap between himself and Gwen. Sorry for the little bit of screaming there, guys. I'm trying to.
Yeah, and that gap is going to be difficult to close here. Gwen now knowing that he's going to go up not only to map point, but to serious point here, because he wins this map, and there's just one round between him and lifting the trophy, as it were, winning Trackmania Grand League in his first season on the top level. He fought his way through Open League in the winter of this year. Together with Afi, they were the two best players. He fought his way through the Combine, winning that match, and now he's here. After winning the regular season of Grand League, he could win the playoffs as well. All that it remains is him hitting this identity and winning one more round of this map. So let's see if Gwen can do it now. 3.5 seconds lead. All he needs to do is avoid clipping the corners of the ice here on the quarter pipes, driving safely to the finish. And it looks like Gwen has this under control. One more drop down here. No mistakes to be had. Gwen is going to go up to match point.
So CarlJr's unfortunate mistake has cost him dearly right here. And now we're moving on to the most important round in the life of a 16-year-old. This round could be worth 4,000 euros at the end of it if everything is executed perfectly. Gwen, this is Gwen's chance of actually getting the prize, getting that paycheck, and also getting that title of the Grand League, and potentially putting an end to the supremacy of CarlJr that he has actually started to do in 2020 with the ZRT Cup 2020 victory that he managed to get. CarlJr currently leading the race after the first few checkpoints into the dirt, but Gwen with much better speed at the exit of that will make this will even the scales out a little bit.
Yeah, actually even them dead out here, as we can see that both players are just within 200. It's too close to call. Both players getting that shortcut jump again so nicely, and we saw Gwen go for a little trick here on the dirt. Let's pay attention to him, as he is going to probably wiggle the car just a little bit there at the exit, and you see that he is crawling away from CarlJr just a bit faster on that. And those are the details that could decide this if no mistakes are had on the identity. These small gains that players are able to find, whereas CarlJr now able to find 100 there on the dirt, and that could be the deciding factor. Coming across here, we saw this freewheeling drift where Gwen crushed other opponents. Can CarlJr follow up on this turn right here?
Oh, he touched it. He got wide.
Oh, I think he avoided the touch, but yeah, he avoided the touch, but he had to go so wide, meaning that he's now 0.2 behind. So into the identity here, Gwen at a disadvantage. Will try to catch up here with a lower line with more speed.
Oh,
but he's gonna go
no!
And I think at this point, with such a big respawn, it is all coming down to the final round, the third round on the fifth map here, because CarlJr has a 10-second lead, and it's all looking like it's going the full distance.
Yeah, and unfortunately for Gwen, it was all too good to be true. With that mistake and that clip on the CP, sending him into a flip over, a backflip, essentially. He's now 9.6 seconds down on CarlJr, who has got pretty much free reign on this two-lapper as he heads into the negative camber corner right now, and he manages to keep it safely on here. Does not go for, goes for a little bit of a wiggle at the end. I thought he would have got it just at the exit of the corner, but apparently CarlJr manages to save that quite a bit, and Gwen making another mistake at the little jump before that third part. He's down 11.9 seconds on CarlJr, so Carl currently having a safe road ahead of him to get himself into final status and move in to one final round in this fall season and this 2020 running of the Grand League as well. Could he make it 2 titles in a row?
Yeah, and you gotta feel for the players now, because they both know what's coming up here. I think both Carl and Gwen know that it's all gonna come down to this one final round to decide Grand League. 2 minutes of driving on Paradise to see who wins this month-long tournament here. CarlJr securing that one, and it is going to start off right away. The final round of Trackmania Grand League. Get some hype in the chat. This is going to be very intense here. Gwen versus Carl Jr., 2-2 map score. Both are finalists, and here we go.
This is the most important round right now of 2020, if not in the beginning of this new decade, which hasn't started in the most awkward of auspices in real life and in the game as well. But let's actually set all that aside and focus on the battle on track. Carl versus Gwen. They're right now within a tenth of each other after the first few checkpoints. With the jump coming up, will anyone make an early mistake that could eventually seal the fate of that Grand League Grand Final? Nope, not quite. Everybody managing to clear up so far. Carl and Gwen still within less than a tenth of each other, within half a tenth, and Gwen trying to take the lead at the dirt throne, and he manages to make so around the outside of Carl Jr. He manages to make the move stick ever so slightly as we are heading towards the second half of the dirt part, and also the turnover coming up right now.
Yeah, Gwen there just barely getting through. He was about to clip the corner. It could have been all over. This match is on a knife's edge right now. Look how close they're driving to the walls. One tiny mistake and it could be all over. This turn is going to be so decisive. Gwen pushing, he crashed this, and he could lose 2 seconds because of this small touch here. Carl Jr. is going to take the lead here early on the map. What is the difference going to be here? 0.97. It is only a second for Gwen, but it is a second that he has to catch up against Carl Jr. in this grudge match. The two players who have been at the top for so long now. Gwen versus Carl. Gwen going very low, and he will minimize that lead. Carl has just a little bit, but it's still 1 second into the second lap. So Carl Jr. now has this in his hands. He's been in this situation before. He has won several World Cups in just the situation, leading a match, being in first, and having to hold the lead for one final lap. Can he do it like he has done all those other times before? This is the time to prove his dominance in the game of Trackmania and really solidify his legacy here over Gwen.
Yeah, and so far Carl Jr. really has really a bit of a buffer to play with. 0.8 of a second, less than 0.9 of a second after the dirt corner from Gwen. Carl Jr. currently leading the race with heading into the dirt part. Will Gwen be able to retaliate? Will he be able to actually take the fight to CarlJr one last time? Will he be able to witness a mistake from the three-time world champion that could seal the fate in his favor? Let's actually see how this goes over the free will part for Carl Jr. Will he pull a Gwen like he did last time around? No, he manages to keep it off the walls. 201 at the exit of that free will part. Carl Jr. has now 0.7 of a gap to Gwen in the heading into the identity now. It's down to the final two ice walls. Here we go, first ice wall for Carl Jr. Will he be able to keep it safe? Oh, barely managing to avoid the CP. Will he be able to keep it safe at the second one? Yes, he can. And Carl Jr. for the second season running is your Grand League Champion. Gwen's big moment will have to wait for another season in winter 2021. $4,000 for Carl Jr. and $2,000 for Gwen at the end of it.
And what a match. We could not have asked for a better ending to this Grand League season. Carl Jr. versus Gwen in the finals. It went the full distance of 5 maps. And although it's so close in that last round, that one mistake, what a showing for both players. And congratulations to Carl Jr., the champion of Trackmania Grand League for the second time in a row.